You are back at another episode of the DNaz channel, and today we have a fun subject. We are diving back into antiquity as usual. We are going to ancient Rome and we are going to look at some of the ancient medicine they used because they had a miracle drug that all the emperors chased after, they sought after. A lot of the emperors were taking certain plants and medicines in order to reverse aging, to stop aging, and as well to prevent themselves from being poisoned or injured. Because in those times, it was very likely that somebody close to you was trying to take the power away from you. They are trying to take your place. So, poisoning was very common in the ancient world, and they had to prevent that. This is a time where medicine was advancing rapidly. It has been in the works for about probably 1,000 years at this point, and it has just been getting more and more sophisticated. By the time we get to Rome, I mean, we can go back to the ancient Sumeria and their texts, and then by the time we get to Rome, a while later, it we are really starting to take off and advance, and we are starting to have physicians and doctors that could stand up to any doctor today, and they use the same type of tools. So let's get into it. Um, Again, so the person I love to go to the most is Galen. Okay, Galen was a Greek physician. All right, and he's from Pergamum. Pergamum was the center for learning, especially about if you're trying to be a physician, because this is where the gladiators went. This is where they had the battles, right? And obviously, your gladiators are owned by the higher ups, right? And they bet on these people and they make money off these gladiators. So these were these people's prized possessions. Their gladiators were their fighters, right? Just like today, if you have a manager of a boxer or something like that, that's your bread and butter. That's your moneymaker, right? So you needed to have good doctors around and you needed to have good medicine and surgery. Okay. So some of the best physicians in the world went to Pergamum to study, to watch other doctors perform surgeries, to learn to and to perform themselves, right? So Galen went over there and he ended up working in the gladiator school, right? Being the top physician for the gladiators because he was so good, right? He eviscerated a live ape in public to show at a live demonstration. He took out the stomach and the insides of a live ape and he put it back in and kept him alive, right? That's how good he was, okay? And this is a time where they had medicine. They had a lot more medicine than we think. That's what I'm trying to bring to your attention. I'm trying to bring just how much knowledge that our ancestors had with working with plants and medicine, and we have lost a lot of that knowledge today. Not that it's actually lost. We do have a lot that is actually lost, but we also have so many of these texts. We have thousands of texts and books written that were left to us from antiquity that if you're going to school for nursing today or to be a doctor today, I mean, I know I'm in college now and I've been in the same classes as nurses because I take science, right? I'm an environmental scientist, but I've done microbiology and biology and I'm in there with a lot of nurses. And I've asked them before, do you know who Galen is? Do you know who Dioscorides is or Hippocrates? And they don't even know today. We're like 50 years ago, if you didn't know who they were, you had your head in the sand, right? Because that's where medicine came from. Galen um, took after Hippocrates. He mainly learned his style, right, working with the four humor system, and he wrote plenty of works. Like I said, we have a lot of books from antiquity. We have, De Materia Medica from Dioscorides. We have Natural History from Pliny the Elder. We have Nicander, who wrote in poetry, and he coded a lot of these drugs in secret words, and he used the names of the gods to and put the names of the gods as code word for certain plants. I always give an example as Artemis, which is known as mugwort. Mugwort is it's like an invasive weed, right? And you can find it everywhere in America. It has a good smell, right? Native Americans use it as like a tobacco substitute, right? People smoke it. It's known to calm you, give you deep sleep, right? And it's named Artemisia, right? That's the Latin name for it, which is after Artemis. And Artemis is always depicted with a deer and a bow because she's the deer hunter, right? But if you know about mugwort, you know that mugwort actually repels deer. So there is a relationship behind the naming of these plants and the names of the gods and what the Romans and Greeks did and these ancient physicians did when they wrote about them. They wrote in code and used them and named these plants after them in order to speak like a universal language, right? Um, they did this because back then not everybody had access to text or knew how to read and write. So a lot of things were passed down by word of mouth. So when you were remembering poems like Nicander, how he wrote these recipes and poems, it was a lot easier to remember a poem, right? Just like the stories of the Greek gods, people there were poets and they would get up in front of a crowd and they would recite their poems and they would tell stories of the gods. Well, same thing. It was a lot easier to remember recipes and um certain drugs if you had a poem behind it because you did not have as much literature. You barely had any literature, and not to mention the lifestyle. They were very nomadic and traveling a lot and was lived outside a lot. You know what I mean? Still made fires every night to stay warm. So how well can you travel with paper documents and then not get ruined? And so there's a lot that goes behind it, but it was very important to have the word of mouth. That's how most things were passed down. Um, if you read from back then, we had these people called rhizotomoi, which were in Greek, it's called rhizotomoi, which means root cutters, right? These are people that worked with roots because most people know that the roots are the most potent part of the plant. So a lot of these recipes contain the roots of the plant. One well-known root from back then is mandrake, and it's known to have hallucinogenic properties. It's high in alkaloids like atropine, hyoscyamine, and scopolamine. Right? They worked with henbane, and so an example we have the Emperor Caligula. I'll get back to Galen, but we have the Emperor Caligula, and we know that he was very interested in his medicinal plants. He even had his own garden, right? He had his own botanical garden with rare species of plants. Um, so this was a science. This was a true science. And if you wanted to be able to heal and speak to the gods or any of these things, you had to know rituals, you had to know the plants, and you had to have this knowledge, right? So so we know through proof of Caligula that they were working with these certain recipes, right? Even in Italy, the most. So I'm going to get back. We have from antiquity, right? We have there was King Mithridates, right? And he had this recipe called the Theriac, Theriaca. Okay, the book Theriaca de Materia. All right, the Theriac meant wild beast. It meant the beast, and that's because the main component in this potion was viper flesh, and it was also mixed with like honey, wine, cinnamon, things like that. Right? It had 70 different ingredients. The Mithridates version had about like 63 ingredients. Galen's version, I think, like had over 70. Right? You had to let it age over time, so it took years to make, and they had special jars for this thing, and we even have one. This recipe lasted all the way up until the 1600s in Britain, right? So we had a lot of kings of England that knew about this recipe, and we have this jar that says Theriac on it, and it's beautiful porcelain, has artwork all over it. Usually the artwork on these jars were from the story of Mithridates, okay, because he's the old king. That's where this comes from. So again, they had these jars. This potion was well known all over the Mediterranean, all over the world back then, right? And what this drug was, Galen's version of it, he tested it on animals. So he took, he was very ahead of his time, right? He was back then they were developing the scientific method ever since Hippocrates and Aristotle and Plato. science was in its creation. Okay, this is the birth of science. So they were developing the scientific method. So Galen, way ahead of his time, was taking groups of chickens, split them into two groups. He gave one group the Theriac and one group he didn't give the Theriac, right? Then he put snakes in there. And the ones that suffered the snake bite that didn't have the Theriac, they died. And the ones that took the Theriac lived. As I said before, a lot of these were based on these emperors were worried about getting poisoned, so they needed drugs to counter poisons. They needed antidotes, right? Um, Snake bites and scorpion bites and spider bites were very, very common back then. Again, this is a more natural world, right? Very nature was everywhere. They had a lot more animals back then, wild lions, all this shit, everything. You had dangers everywhere. So it was very common that someone got bit by a snake or something venomous. So they needed these cures, okay? And so we have in works of Galen, we have a lot of works of Galen, but Galen recorded his time. He ended up, after the gladiator school and working as the head physician with the gladiators, he ended up becoming the personal physician of Marcus Aurelius, right? He is the most fair known ruler of all time, but Marcus suffered from digestional issues and he was sick a lot. So Galen was giving him his Theriac daily, right? And it had opium and it had a lot of things in it, right? So Galen did a lot of tests on this concoction, right? And he knew that it prevented poison, it prevented snake bites, right? It prevented all these things. So you even have in the story of Odysseus when before he meets think it was Medea. I forget what witch. Circe. He meets the witch Circe. The god Hermes comes up to him and gives him this grass moly, which could be snowdrop, because snowdrop is known to clear the mind. Right? It's actually used today as something to help with Alzheimer's disease. Okay, it's great for the brain, right? But it's also toxic. But Hermes gave Odysseus moly before he went to see the witch Circe because he knew that she was going to poison Odysseus, and the poison would not work if he had ingested the moly, right? So this was very common in antiquity. A lot of people were working with these antidotes, and we have so many texts about these antidotes, and we have so many cults that were made around these recipes because a lot of these drugs like hellebore, henbane, and mandrake, they have psychoactive properties. But just like ayahuasca, you're poisoning yourself, and that's where you're getting these hallucinations from. Your body goes through purgation, right? It goes through purgation. So a lot of these drugs were purgatives, and that's how they healed, because they had this four humor system where they thought that one of the balances of your body was off. So they gave you something to detox you. They would purge you of any toxins, and you would vomit it all out, shit it all out. But that's how your body does clean. Just like it, so these poisons almost reacted to the body as if the body was poisoned, right? And we know Galen was writing that Marcus Aurelius started needing this every day because without it he'd feel poisoned. What is that? Just like the effects of the opium, right? Just like people today, they get hooked on opium or opioids, and when they don't have it, they feel poisoned, right? So because you are using poisons all the time and your body wants to get rid of those poisons, but sometimes they were working with poisons, as in your body has a bacteria that it got from the world, right? You didn't do it because you were taking these drugs, but now we need to give you a poison so your body can purge your itself of the toxins, okay? So we have all this evidence, and they also were very interested in stopping aging, right? So Galen also wrote that he was giving Marcus Aurelius this he called it like an Egyptian bean size worth every day. So think of it like pills. They had pills back then, okay? They were very sophisticated. They had their surgical tools they were garnished in gold and silver and precious metals, right? They are the same instruments that we use today when we do things, when we do autopsy, all these things, when we do surgery, right? They had scalpels, they had all this, and they were well made, right? So they were very sophisticated, okay? And Galen is working with all these different recipes, and he's recording the effects they have, and he's recording how Marcus Aurelius is getting better because he's taking this Theriac drug, right? And it actually seems as if he is looking younger, right? He's getting healthier and looking younger, okay? So that's why this recipe lasted all the way into the 1600s in Italy, where we have that vase that says the Theriac, because so many people sought after this, but the problem was it had 70 different ingredients, and we have lost most of the text on how to prepare it. So you're guessing, replicating this recipe, right? You really, and a lot of it is written again in code, right? Like Nicander did. It's written in code, so that you have to decipher the code the right way. You might think it's one plant, but it's actually a different one, right? You have to go back. This is why we need classicists and linguists to go back and research this and know what the recipe was, because we're doing it today. We actually have just came across, we've been testing mice, and we've came across a reverse aging pill, and you're going to see it start to come out. And that is what humanity should be doing with all of our science and knowledge. We should be figuring out how to make us live longer and how to be healthier and how to not pollute the earth so much. That is the direction we should be going. So that's why I do these episodes, and I'm very big with plants, and I'm very big with antiquity, because I believe when you look to history and you look into the past and you read what our ancestors left us, you can learn from it, right? These people were not stupid people, and we have been lied to about that. We have been told that they were simpler than us, that we're way smarter than them today, but they had technologies that were amazing. They built things out of stone that stood the test of time, that are still around today, and they have done amazing things that we would have thought impossible, right? And we keep finding out more and more, and they were way more sophisticated than we ever thought. The ancient world, it has so much hidden knowledge, and that's why we need to stay on board with people like Graham Hancock, people like that want to push against academia and say, no, you guys are stuck in this belief that clearly isn't true, because we have all this evidence that the society back then was sophisticated and advanced. They just had different technologies, right? They were more natural. They didn't make all these, this is when alchemy was starting. So this is when they were playing with mixing, you have the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, right? So we're just playing with mixing metals. Then it gets out of hand to where we're mining the earth way too much now today. We are mixing things and making substances that the earth doesn't naturally make. So now it's causing pollution and it's causing all these problems. We've covered the surface of the earth in concrete. So now we're more susceptible to floods, and our weather patterns are more intense, and our global warming is more intense. Our CO2 level is higher, and that's all from this advancement. So yes, we could still learn from our mistakes, and we have knowledge at the tip of our hands now. Everybody's able to read and write. Everybody's able to have a phone and get knowledge. So it is a beautiful area. We just need to figure out how to fix it and how to move forward for the betterment of all humanity. And we need to get back to our grassroots and get back to Mother Nature and get back to healing the earth and preserving it for the longevity of our race, right? Of our species and the rest of the species on earth, on this beautiful planet that provides us so much, that is so beautiful and so amazing. We have no clue how the chance that we have this much of beautiful life here, this much biodiversity. So we need to get back to working with nature, work with our ancestors, decipher these texts and start bringing out these recipes. So start learning about the Theriac, look into it, learn about Galen, okay, learn about Dioscorides, Pliny the Elder, Nicander, Crataeus, who's the father of botanical illustration, Diocles, Theophrastus, all these people. Ibn Sina is an Islamic, right, doctor. So when we think of the Dark Ages, that was just the Dark Ages to the English, right? But over in the Middle East, there was great philosophy and mathematicians there and doctors there. Ibn Sina is one of them. Al Haytham, okay, is one of them. So yes, let's start spreading the knowledge. Let's start really uncovering the truth. Stop believing everything we were told that we know are lies, because we have the physical evidence here. We have these giant structures, these pyramids, these, you know, all these mathematical correlations, all these alignments to the stars that these structures are aligned with. And we can see that the civilization back in the day was advanced. The timeline is not what it seems. It actually spreads much longer. Human beings, Homo sapiens, what's the other one? Denisovans, Neanderthals, all of us were much smarter than they led us to believe. And there's a lot of knowledge we can learn from our ancestors. So you've been watching the DNaz channel, and come back for more if you haven't. Like and subscribe. And I'll be getting back into ancient pharmacology and more plants and medicinal uses we can have to heal yourself naturally and organically. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.